As a DM, it is inevitable that at some point a player will come to you and say something along the lines of, "I swing my sword at the beholder to cut off one of its eye stalks." Can I do that? Though the logic holds that you are always trying to commit mutilating harm to your enemies when you're in a fight with them, the answer of the rules don't actually support that is not very satisfying. So today, we're going to fix that. G'day friends, my name's Timothy, though some people do call me Tim. I'm a professional dungeon master, and here on my channel I'll help you improve your game of Dungeons & Dragons. Let's get to it, eh? There's always been a pretty solid argument against putting called shots into 5th edition. I've been on that side of the fence myself simply because I really don't like to add complexity to my games unless there's a lot of depth being derived from that added complexity. I run for players all over the world in all sorts of different time zones who have not met each other before they're brought together to play, and what I want to happen is for them to be able to understand what the rules are going to be like, what the game is going to run like, and how it goes with as little onboarding chaos as I can manage. I don't want to have to teach them an entirely new rule set and a bunch of house rules that aren't going to add a ton back into the game by their existence. So rules have to be very low in complexity and very high in depth for me to even consider adding them to my repertoire. Because called shots haven't been defined in this edition, it's pretty understandable why those of us who like to run a raw game don't include them in there. We have to go back a couple of editions in order to find some truly simple called shot rules that add any kind of depth to the game without just adding a ton of complex options. We're not looking for a DM's Guild supplement 30 pages long with random tables depending upon which limb you're targeting at any period of time. What we want is something rules light that delivers. Similarly, there's the argument that it is always the best option to utilize a called shot. After all, if you come against this big burly dude in a full suit of plate mail with glowing dwarven runes upon his armor, but he doesn't happen to be wearing a helmet, aren't you gonna try and stab that guy in the face? Why wouldn't you? Obviously, that's the weak spot. That's where you should attack. And it's logical to assume that that's what our characters are constantly doing, and we're just failing to get him in the face when we make our attack, and instead being parried aside or nicking off of armor or so on and so forth. And so explaining why a called shot means that you're actually targeting the thing that you logically should be targeting at all times does have a certain degree of logic to it. With all of that arrayed against called shots, that means that what we need is a light rule that has lots of opportunity without creating a lot of complexity, and that fits the narrative of being an unusual situation that is being capitalized upon and not the standard status quo of a typical situation. And I think that that's what I have to deliver to you here today. Speaking of called shots, I assure you, you will not get disadvantage on your attack roll in order to try and push the subscribe and like buttons. It really helps the channel out, and I'd love to be able to help you on another occasion. One of the reasons that called shots are a good thing to potentially add into the game is because we can use them to bridge the gap between martial characters and spellcasters. If we restrict called shots and that level of precision sort of fighting to the martial characters, and we take away the opportunity for spellcasters to utilize this rule set, then we give the martials something special that they can contribute, something interesting and tactical to do from round to round that can impact the fight in a big way without allowing the spellcasters to outshine them with that same set of rules. By making it a matter of skilled sword play or skilled targeting with a precise weapon like a bow, then we give a little boost to the martials without taking anything away from the spellcasters who are already kicking it. Another argument in favor of called shots is that it allows us to increase our narrative immersion because we are going to give options to people who are paying attention to the kind of creature that they're fighting, the way they fight, the things that they're wearing, the limbs and options that they have at their disposal. We reward their immersion and their ingenuity by allowing them to interact with this system and deliver an attack that will do more than just deal damage. So get on with it already. I hear hear you. How does the mechanical crunch work? It's pretty simple. The house rule goes like this. When making a weapon attack, whether ranged or melee, you can do so at disadvantage in order to hit a specific portion of your opponent's body. Because the assumption is that you're already trying to kill somebody and that they are automatically trying to defend their most vulnerable areas, this targeted attack must be targeted at a portion of their body that would not be lethal immediately if hit. If you succeed on this disadvantaged attack, you deal your normal damage, and a special effect might come about depending upon how much damage you did in comparison to the total hit points of the creature. Typically, for a major portion of the creature's body, you might be required to do as much as a quarter of their hit points in order to get a special benefit. For ease, I would personally use a quarter of their hit points and a tenth of their hit points in order to determine when a special influence would come about in addition to the damage that's caused. Because of the nature of the bounded accuracy system, there's no problem with giving disadvantage being offset by multiple layers of advantage, because all you're going to get back to is a regular attack roll when they could have otherwise had a greater chance of hitting and dealing damage to their opponent. If you want, you can set other thresholds of damage that aren't related to the overall hit point of the monster, but really it's just about making sure that it's a telling enough blow to be worth a special benefit. The DM then adjudicates a special benefit, because that's what we're here for. The reason that we aren't playing a computer game like Baldur's Gate 3 is because we don't have to codify everything up front. We can make judgment calls to decide what is best in the moment. Attacking the main eye of a beholder might take a decent amount of hit points in order to be able to temporarily knock it out of operation. Attacking one of its side rays, however, might require a lesser amount and might actually sever the eye ray from the beholder, limiting its options on its eye ray attack next round. When targeting a giant scorpion's stinger, it might require a fair amount of damage to be able to remove that weapon attack, whereas it might require less damage in order to be able to cripple one claw. If your ranger is attempting to pin somebody to the wall with an arrow and does sufficient damage to a limb that's close to it, why not give them a grappled condition to hold them in place for a moment and require them to rip themselves free? We can use the conditions that are already in the game. We can deactivate single abilities or attack rolls. We can even take a page out of Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants, and for particularly challenging foes, require a specific amount of damage to be done in a single turn in order to gain the benefit that we're looking for as the creature heals, adjusts, or resets their armor about the wounded appendage. This leads to further tactical gameplay as people team up with readied actions that take place on other people's turns, or they burn resources in order to get a number of solid blows in with that action surge fighter hacking at the weapon of their opponent to knock it out of one of their many limbs. In order to make this possible, we need to make sure that we foreshadow but also tell our players that such things are possible by telling them what the rule is up front and reminding them occasionally of its existence, and then calling specific details of our opponents out to the players. We're going to slowly train them to have that opportunity to think in the mindset of their character about what would be better, dealing straight damage to a foe or reducing the amount of damage that it can deal in return, or else limiting an ability that truly is devastating to your particular group type or could cause you trouble. If you want to open up the field, you can also allow people to consider objects that are upon their opponents. Perhaps they're taking a called shot and foregoing the damage in order to try to sunder an opponent's weapon, disarm them, or perhaps just steal a component pouch to stop certain spells from being put into use. All of these are possible when you adjudicate them in the moment, and the disadvantage system is just such an elegant, simple way to resolve whether or not they succeed on the attempt. By setting damage thresholds, you enable yourself to determine whether or not an influence is going to come about. One of the things I really like about this is that as you continue to progress and the damage that people are able to deal grows stronger and stronger, lesser foes become easier to maim while greater foes continue to grow with you. There's really no time that the called shot mechanic becomes unbalanced and unfair if you are setting these individual rules based on the circumstances that come up. And as long as you tell your players what's going on, in fact, even to the point where you could say, yes, you could attempt this, but you would need to deal this much damage. Being upfront and showing some of the DCs behind on this particular occasion is not necessarily a bad call, because your character should be able to determine that difficulty. And this is one of those times when the character's information about the world can only be expressed to the player with numbers. So feel free to tell them just how hard it would be for them to sever that beholder's eye ray or to blind it in its anti-magic eye. By letting them know what that is, they'll be able to judge whether or not that's an ability that they want to take advantage of. But once again, it's one more tool in their toolbox that they wouldn't otherwise have. Have you ever tried to implement a called shot mechanic in your games? I would love to hear about it. Go ahead and leave a comment, and thanks so much for watching. Happy adventuring.